Hey everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and this is a quick tutorial about how to add short rows to the back of your sweater neck so that your sweater will sit very nicely and not ride up on your throat. So I'm working on this Samantha jumper, and it is a bottom-up sweater with a little color work around the hem, and I'm using a Sweet Georgia yarn, BFL, blue-faced Leicester, and silk combination in a DK weight. So the measurements that I show you and the kind of proportions that I show you are going to be for that DK weight yarn. And so as you can see, I'm already past the point where I've divided the front and the back, worked my armhole shaping, and I'm about 6 inches into the armhole depth. That's kind of a perfect spot for me. I tend to like my armholes to be about 7 inches long, and so anywhere in the last inch or so of the back work is a good place for those short rows that are going to raise up the collar on the back. And the cool thing about short rows is that once you've added them, if you add them in that last inch or so of your sweater, you can then continue to knit across the top of your short rows in plain stockinette. You'll maintain that shaping that this short rows added, but you can just finish off whatever armhole depth you need. You just have to remember to measure your armhole depth from the actual break and separation of stitches up to the edge of your garment instead of the center back, where you're going to have added some extra fabric and some extra inches. So let's get started. Okay, so here we are on the back of the sweater, and you can see I've put a few markers in to help me out. This one in the center is the center of the back, and these two little red guys are marking off my shoulder stitches, which I will eventually use for a 3-needle bind off with the front of the sweater. And that kind of helps me center everything, because as you can see, this is otherwise it would be a straight line without any short rows. And if you put on a sweater that doesn't have any short rows, basically the back is the same as the front, and that will often make the front ride up on your neck and be kind of uncomfortable. Whereas if you can add a little fabric to the back will sit up higher and allow the front to sit a little bit below, most of the time, your collarbone, so that it's not choking you out in the front of the sweater. Now the basic principle here is that you probably want to add about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch of short rows, and 1/2 inch to 1 inch of fabric, and you're trying to make sure that that fabric ends up mostly here along the back of the neck. You don't need as much fabric out on the shoulders, and in fact what you're trying to create is a little bit of a kind of triangle shape, right? So the majority of that extra fabric is going to be in the center, and as you go toward the edges, it's going to be a diminished amount of fabric. So for me, about 1 inch of fabric, if I look at my gauge swatch, or if I just look at my sweater and kind of do a quick count, I need about 7 rows to create about 1 inch of fabric. And like I said, I want the bulk of that fabric to be in the center here. So I want to make sure that as I'm doing my rows, I'm not adding so much fabric at the edges as I am at the center. So I want to make sure that that center part, especially for the entire neckline, is going to be about, for me, 1 inch. I prefer, some people say 1/2 inch. It's really up to your own preference, but you figure that out by knowing your row gauge. So what I'm going to do is walk you through this before I get started on it. And as you can see, I'm on a right side row, which is where I want to be. And as I said before, I'm in the last 1 inch or 2 of the back knitting. So after this, I will work straight across for probably another 1 inch. But the nice thing about short rows is that they will be integrated, and that shape of the short row will be integrated even as I work this regular old stockinette stitch forward after I complete these short rows. Okay, so on a right side row, I'm going to start over here and I'm going to knit across until I am 5 stitches from the edge. And what I'll do to show you that is I'll put a little marker here so that you can see that. That's where I'm going to do my first turn. So when I reach this point, as with all short rows, I'm not working the entire row. That's why it's called a short row. So I'm going to leave these 5 stitches just hanging out over here by themselves, and I'm going to turn the work using German short rows. I'm going to come back all the way across, purling on the wrong side, until I reach 5 stitches before the edge over here. And I will then, at this point right here, 5 stitches from the edge, do the same thing. German short row turn and knit back across. Now when I get back over here, I want to make sure that I'm continuing to make these rows shorter and shorter and shorter to concentrate the bulk of that fabric right in the center of the neck. So I'm going to go for about 5 stitches ahead of that last turn. Okay, I'll put a marker in there so you can see it. So this row is going to end here as opposed to here. And then I will purl all the way back and do the same thing on this side. So I've got 5 stitches in. The next 5 stitches in would be here. And I'm going to, again, turn my work and go back over here. And this time I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to end up 5 stitches ahead of that turn, which puts me neatly at the shoulder marker. Now, it doesn't always have to be that case. I think short rows in the back can be pretty flexible, and you can play around with them on a lot of the sweaters that you knit and decide what your personal preference is. For me, this is going to produce 6 short rows, which is an inch of fabric concentrated between my shoulders in that opening for the neck. So to me, for this particular sweater, that is kind of ideal. If you wanted to do, say, 1/2 inch of short rows, you would only do maybe 4 rows, depending on your gauge. This is a DK weight yarn. And if that were the case, maybe you would, instead of doing 5, maybe you'd do 10 on each side and come in a little bit more rapidly to create more of the bulk of the fabric right at the back. It just depends on what you like. Okay, so we were over here, purl back, and again stop here, which would be another 5 stitches before where we were. And that's 6 rows. And then from that point, what I'm going to do is turn my work, go back across, and I'm going to knit all of the double knits, all of those German short row turns as I find them, and then I'll go back across and catch all of those little double turns over here as well. So let me take you through it. And some of it will be in slow and some of it will be sped up so that you don't have to sit here and watch me knit this entire back. But let's get started with this right side row, and I'll meet you over here once we get to the turn point. Okay, so I'm coming up on the first marker where I know I want to do my turn. So I'm just going to knit to that marker. And that marker again is telling me that I'm shorting my row. So I'm leaving these 5 stitches where they are. I'm going to pop that marker off just so I don't need it anymore. And I'm going to turn my work. And to do a German short row on the purl side, you always want your yarn to be in the front. So when you're on the purl side, that's simple because you're already in the front. You're going to slip this stitch, and then to purl, you're going to wrap this yarn around. You guys see that? So to purl, you got it in the front, you slipped your stitch, and then you're going to take that yarn and go up over your needle, around, and pull it to the front so that you can purl like that. You're going to purl all the way back across to 5 stitches before the end of this row. So I'll meet you over there. Coming up on the wrong side of my work toward the end of where I'm going to short the row. And we've got 5 stitches left on this needle. So now I'm going to turn my work again. Okay. Now in this case, my yarn is at the back because I was just working a purl stitch and I just turned my work. So the first thing we're going to do is bring the yarn to the front to work the German short row. And then we're going to slip purlwise that stitch. Okay. And then we're going to go in as if to knit this next stitch. And we're going to pull our yarn, instead of putting it to the back, we're going to pull it over the top. And you're creating, I think you can see that, you're creating a little double-legged stitch right there. And that's okay. You're going to do that. Wrap it regular like you would to knit, and then just keep going back across. And I'll meet you on the other side to show you the next step. Third short row toward the end, and I've marked this, as you know, with the green clip so that you can see where I want to turn. But if you didn't have a clip, you could just look at your knitting and you can see that here I've got this double stitch, and that is the turn that we did. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in front of that guy, and that's right where we're going to turn it. So even if you didn't have a little clip there, you would be able to figure it out. You've got 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then there's your turn. So let's work up to there. Knit, knit, knit. And then when we get to the place we want to turn, I'm just going to get this guy out of the way. And that's where we're going to turn our work again. And again, we're just basically doing the same thing we did before. This is going to be our 4th short row on the wrong side. And our yarn is in the front already for that German short row, so we're ready to go there. We're going to slip that stitch, and then to purl the next stitch, we're going to get that yarn back in the front, but we're going to create that double stitch right there. And then purl the next stitch, and keep going back across on our 4th short row. And I will meet you on the other side. Okay, we're at the end of our 4th row here, and in this case I just want you to read your knitting. So we're going to see we've got 5 right here. That was the initial turn, and you can see the double stitch there. And then we've got double, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're going to turn our work right here for the next to the next row. So I'm going to get right over there. This is how you do it if you don't want to put markers in. You just read your knitting. Should be right about here. Let's see if I'm right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. One more. There we go. And this is where we're going to turn our work. All right, same thing as before. We're on, the yarn is in the back, so we need to move it to the front. We're going to slip that stitch. We're going to go into the next stitch as if to knit, and we're going to pull that yarn over the top and into a regular knit stitch. It's almost like a little mini yarn over, and it's going to create that double stitch right there. All right, I'm going to knit across the 5th short row, and I'll meet you on the other side. Okay, so I'm coming to the end of my 5th short row, and again you can see, if you want to read your knitting, you can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches, and then we have that double stitch, so double stitch, 2, 3, 4, 5, another double stitch, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so our last short row on the right hand side is going to end up being exactly where that shoulder marker is. All right, so I'm just going to get to that point, and this is where we're going to turn our work. Turn. The yarn is already at the front, so we're going to slip it, get ourselves in position to purl by bringing that yarn all the way around, and then purl across on our 6th and final short row. And I will meet you at the end. Our 6th and, okay, we're nearing the end of our 6th and final short row. Again, we have 5 stitches, then our double stitch, 2, 3, 4, 5, double stitch, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so we're going to want to turn the work right at that, what happens to be the shoulder marker. I'm going to turn our work here. It's easier this time around. And this time we're going to do the turn again. So we need to bring our yarn to the front, slip that stitch, go into the next stitch as if to knit, pull this all the way over and around to a knit stitch, and then we're going to go back across. Now when we reach the end of this right side row, we're not going to do any turning. We're not going to turn our work to work back again because we've just completed our 6 short rows now. So what we're going to do, we're going to focus on picking up those double-legged stitches and making them invisible so that when we look at the fabric on the back of the neck in the end, you won't be able to see any of the turns that we made. That was just my center back marker that we just crossed. And we're going to come up pretty quickly here on our first double-legged stitch from our turn. And since we know it's right around the shoulder marker, it's definitely easy to recognize. If you didn't have a marker in place, you're pretty sure to recognize these double stitches because they are pretty pronounced. Here's our first one. Okay, I'm going to try to bring it up really close here so you can see. So you can see it looks all funny and weird. It has 2 legs, and what are you supposed to do with it? Is it supposed to be forward or back? Here's what I do. I always take my finger and put it on the little knot, kind of roll it forward. So you can see there are 2 legs here. 1, 2. I'm going to knit through both legs, just like knitting 2 together. So you see that? 2 legs, I'm going to go right through both of them, do a regular knit stitch, and then it disappears. I'm going to leave that shoulder marker in there, and I'm going to continue knitting. I'm going to probably pull that next stitch just a little bit more than I normally would to make sure that it closes up nicely. I'm going to knit about 4 more stitches here, and then I'm going to see the next one. right? And again, I'm going to put my finger on that little knot and turn it forward so I can see those two legs. I'm going to go right underneath those two legs and knit them together. Pop, and again, tug that next stitch just a little bit. And we're going to reach our last double stitch here. Again, just put your finger on there and roll it over if you really can't see those two legs. 1, 2. And I'm just going to go right under those two legs. Knit them together like that. And then knit the next stitch normally. And I'm going to finish the row this time because we're no longer doing the short row. So I'm going to go all the way to the edge before I turn my work. Now you can see there's no holes. Everything's nice and neat right through there. That's why I love the German short rows. Now I'm going to turn my work because it's a normal thing that you would do working in the flat. I'm going to turn your work and work back across and purl. And I'm going to meet you on the other side of this row so that you can see how I clean up those German double stitch turns on the purl side. And then we'll have a look at the final version of our short row shaping. And by the way, you'll see on this side, as you come to those double-legged stitches, you can kind of still see them. There's a little bit here, almost like you had to knit two together. I don't know if you can see that. It's a little thicker right there than a normal stitch. You're just going to treat it like a normal stitch because it's just going to act like a normal stitch. Same as we get up here, you'll see another one of them just past the shoulder marker. Here he is. See, it's just a little thicker because it has that double wrap on it. I'm going to treat it like a normal stitch and go across. All right, I'll meet you on the other side. Okay, I'm almost at the end of that wrong side row where I'm going to start picking up those double stitches. That's a normal stitch, normal stitch. Look, there's one of those crazy double stitches. I'm going to move that marker out of the way so you can see it. Okay, there it is. Again, just like on the knit side, it's got those two wonky legs. And I just roll it back and go through both of those legs. See that? Just right through both of those legs, just like you're purling two together. Pop it out, get this marker out of the way. And you can see, again, it's gonna have a little extra fabric on the back, but that's gonna go away, no problem. We're gonna do an extra little tug on that one just to make sure that it's closed. And we're gonna work our way across to the next double stitch. There it is. So you can see they're pretty prominent. You're not going to miss them as you're knitting. And again, I'm going to go right through those two legs, purl them together, let it fall to the back, give the next stitch an extra tug just to be sure that it's all closed up. And there's another one. Push it back so you can get access to those two legs, purl them together, give that next stitch an extra tug, kind of like you would when you're doing ribbing with a purl and a knit. And we went all the way to the end of the row because we're done with our short rows, right? I'm going to turn my work over so that you can see what we've done here. Now you'll remember that when we started, the back was very flat, right? Look at it now. It has quite a little bit of a curve to it. And that's right where it's going to sit up on your neck. Right, see that little extra bit of fabric. And if you look to the shoulders, you can see that it's a little hard because it's not all blocked, but you can see the shoulders have a little bit of a slope to them. And that's kind of anatomically more comfortable. And you can see that the middle has a kind of nice, long, wide, extra bit of fabric. And again, on this side, the shoulder is sloped just a little bit down so that it will sit much better on your body. So that's how I add short rows to the back of a sweater to raise up the back of the neck. Again, it's just how I do it. There are plenty of other ways to do it, plenty of other ways that you could do ratios and measurements, and some people like to add 1.5 inches, some people like 1/2 inch. It's really up to you, but you have now the basic technique of what to do, and you just have to modify it for whatever gauge you have so that you know how many rows you have to complete the short rows on the back. If, for example, you had a gauge where you had only 4 rows to the inch, you might want to concentrate those stitches a little bit more toward the center and a little less toward the outside. Since I have a DK weight yarn and I had 6 rows to work with, I could really spread it out and make a kind of nice wide swoop. If I were working with a fingering weight yarn, I would have more rows potentially to work with. Maybe I'd have, I don't know, 9 or 10 to work with, and going toward a lace weight yarn, something like that. And if that was the case, I might want to do more than 5 stitches for each side, for each turn, just to make sure that things were concentrated in the center. So I hope that helps you think about how to add some short rows to the back of your sweater, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.